morning. I'm Pastor Chavaleh, and I'm very happy to welcome you virtually to Mount Cross this morning. I have some thoughts on Mark chapter 7 this morning, this very serious moment where Jesus has some very heavy criticism of some of the religious leaders of the time. Mark begins. Now, when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders, and they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the careful washing of cups and pots, and bronze kettles and beds. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" And Jesus said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition.'" That's a lot, Jesus. Okay, just to be clear, I'm a fan of hand washing. It's something I do several times a day without fail, and it's something I definitely recommend you do as well. But just like so many moments in the Gospels and the things that Jesus really cares about, I think this is not about that. My friend, fellow pastor, and colleague, Cory Driver, had some great thoughts about this text this week in the Living Lutheran Lectionary blog. He noted that human rules sometimes get in the way of sharing the goodness and grace of the kingdom of heaven. We may know all the rules, but are we following Jesus to make sure everyone is fed? He connected this with some experiences that he had had around communion, which reminded me of one of mine. Very soon after I became a follower of Jesus as an adult, I was at a funeral for a family member down in Longview. All I had really experienced to that point were the very open Lutheran churches that I had conducted choirs and played organ for. But here, before communion, the priest had some words to say that shook me. He said, "There are people here who are not right with the church. Your mother, aunt, and friend wants you to return, and today you will feel the sting of being outside communion with God. If you're not a Catholic in good standing, you may come up with your arms crossed, and I will pray for your return." My parents, who were not right with the mother church at all, were more upset that I refused to go up than with this priest for his harsh unwelcome. And I know that Catholics have strict rules around communion, and perhaps they have their reasons. But I wonder if Jesus' response that day would have been, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites. As it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines.'" The crowds have been gathered around Jesus and his disciples all day, and they were touching and being touched by sick people wanting to be healed. So yes, washing their hands would have been a good idea, of course. But the Pharisees are caught up in the question, how can you eat after doing all that? Being around all these diseased and ceremonially unclean people without doing the rituals that would make them right with the church again. My friend Cory wrote, "Jesus is incensed by the direction of the question. After healing people, how could the disciples eat? Why not ask instead, before they ate, how did Jesus and his disciples heal?" This week's lectionary text missed it. omits it, but Jesus' questioning is illustrative of his understanding of what the Pharisees are asking. He accused them of using the rules of men about sacrifice to defraud parents of economic support that children must provide. Jesus was explaining that the rules of hand washing were being used to deprive the people of something that they were owed based on relationships. If the disciples must become ritually pure after healing others before they are allowed to eat, at least one of two things would suffer. There would be less time for eating or less time for healing. Jesus was concerned that enforcing hand-washing rules, though a good idea, would get in the way of the provision of food or health. God's commandments, Cory continues, are to love our neighbor as ourselves. Every Pharisee there that day knew this, to be sure, but by focusing on the common hands that the disciples were eating with, the critics missed out on how uncommon the hands were that healed and grasped out to be healed. Isn't that beautiful? Jesus' priority is on the feeding, the serving, the healing. And he calls us to this, whatever the state of our hands. Sometimes we feel that what we have to offer to others isn't good enough, or perhaps that we have made enough mistakes that we don't have a right to encourage others, or, like that misguided priest of my experience, that human rules should supersede our care and welcome in the name of God. So if you are called to make a choice between ministry or welcome and rules or tradition, I encourage you to err on the side of Jesus. May he say to us that our lips and hearts matched, honoring him with our actions and nearness to his priorities and to his people. And may God help and guide us. Thanks for being here today. I hope to see you Sunday. Have a great rest of your week.